Story 1. The town where everyone goes indoors when the siren sounds, except me. The first time I heard the siren, I honestly thought it was just a test. I'd only been in Greyhaven for about 3 weeks. It's a tiny town. It's a kind with just one main road and evenings so quiet you can hear your own thoughts a little too clearly. Sound carries here further than it should. Then, at exactly 6:40 p.m., a low, mournful siren rolled across the town. It wasn't loud or panicked. It was just heavy, like it was physically pressing down on the air. I glanced at my phone, expecting an emergency alert to buzz through, but nothing happened. What really unsettled me wasn't the siren itself, it was the people. The instant that sound started, every single person on the street reacted. It was unnerving. Conversations just stopped mid-sentence. People walking their dogs turned and headed straight home. Shop owners were locking up without even a moment's hesitation, parents grabbing their children's hands and pulling them close. In less than 30 seconds, the entire street was empty. Curtains were drawn, lights dimmed, doors shut tight. And then there was just me, standing alone in the middle of the road, listening. The sound didn't signal danger, not in the way you'd expect. There was no urgency, no rising pitch to warn of an incoming threat. It stayed at a steady, solemn tone for exactly 3 minutes. Then it just stopped. Silence crashed back in, heavier than before. 5 minutes later, like clockwork, the town came back to life. Doors opened, people emerged, cars started up again. It was as if a play had ended, and everyone knew their cue to re-enter the stage. Later that night, I had to ask someone. My neighbor Clara, a woman in her 70s who seemed to see everything from her front window, was my best bet. "What's that siren for?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer right away. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly. "Were you outside?" She asked. "Yeah," I said. Her lips pressed into a thin, worried line. "That's not good," she whispered. Clara leaned in a little closer, her voice dropping. "When the siren sounds," she said, her words deliberate and firm, "you go inside, immediately." I couldn't help but ask, "Why?" She just shook her head slowly. "You don't ask why." Now, for most people, that should have been enough. A clear, if mysterious warning. But it wasn't enough for me. The next evening, I stayed outside again. My curiosity was stronger than my fear. Right on the dot, 6:40 p.m., the siren began its somber call. This time, it felt closer, heavier. I could feel the vibrations deep in my chest. I watched the town perform its vanishing act all over again. Doors slammed. Lights went out. The entire world just narrowed down to me, the sound and something else. That's when I noticed it. The shadows. They were moving wrong, not shifting with the setting sun or the distant streetlights. They were sliding sideways, stretching and contorting as if something was passing between them, just out of sight. I held my breath. Every muscle in my body tensed. The siren droned on, unchanging. But the air grew thick, almost suffocating. I felt watched. I felt measured. And then at the far end of Main Street, a figure stepped into view. It was tall, impossibly thin. Its shape seemed to bend and warp in the dim light, as if it wasn't quite used to standing upright in our world. It didn't walk. It just adjusted its position, like a thought correcting itself in your mind. Clara's voice echoed in my head, a frantic warning. "Don't let them know you see them." The thing's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement. It was listening. I forced myself to lower my gaze, to stare at the cracks in the pavement as the siren continued its mournful song. Suddenly, a voice spoke, but it didn't come from the figure. It came from everywhere at once, inside my own head. "You are late," it said, a soundless whisper that shook my very bones. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't know. I managed to whisper back to the empty street. The siren's tone dipped for just a second. "Now you do," the voice replied. In that moment, I understood. The sound wasn't a warning for the townspeople. It was a boundary, a signal that marked a brief, terrifying overlap between our Greyhaven and SHE. Something ancient and patient. The siren didn't warn us of them. It told them when the town was ready, when it was empty for them. The moment the siren stopped, the air snapped back to normal. The figure at the end of the street was just gone. The world returned. My legs gave out from under me, and I collapsed right there on the pavement, gasping for breath. That night, there was a knock at my door, not hurried or threatening, just a measured, steady knock. When I opened it, 3 people were standing on my porch. Clara was one of them. "You stayed outside," she said. It wasn't a question. I just nodded, unable to speak. "You were seen," another man added, his face grim. "That doesn't happen often." They finally told me everything. Greyhaven was built on a crossing, a thin place between worlds. Every single evening at the exact same time, that boundary weakened. The siren was designed to mask the town's presence, to confuse the visitors and keep them from settling here. But not everyone listened. Over the years, some had stayed outside. Some watched from their windows. Some even tried to communicate. Those people were remembered, they said, but never named. "They're learning," Clara explained, her voice trembling slightly. "The siren keeps our routine predictable, but it also keeps them predictable." My throat was dry. "What happens if it stops?" I asked. No one answered. The silence was its own terrifying reply. It happened on a Tuesday. 6:40 p.m. Came and went. Nothing. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. At 6:41, a quiet panic began to ripple through the streets. By 6:42, people were already rushing indoors, slamming their doors shut without being told. Then, at 6:45, the siren screamed. It was louder, more frantic than I'd ever heard it. They came early, too early. The town was too slow. I was inside, but I watched from a crack in my curtains. Shadows peeled themselves off walls like old paint. Figures emerged from the reflections in shop windows. The town held its breath, trapped. Then came the knock. It wasn't on my door this time. It was a pressure inside my head and my chest. "You see us?" the voice from everywhere said. "You stayed." My back was pressed hard against my front door. "Stay outside with us," it offered. "You don't belong to the hiding ones." I squeezed my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. Just then, the siren wailed again, longer and harder than before, and the pressure in my head was gone. The next day, the town held a meeting. I wasn't invited. Clara came by later that evening, her face pale. "They changed the rule," she said. "What rule?" I asked. She looked me straight in the eye. "If you've been seen," she said, "you don't go outside anymore. Ever." I'm writing this all down because tonight, the siren sounded early, because the lights in my house just flickered and died, because the shadows in my own living room are moving wrong, and because I just heard a knock, not on my door, but from the inside of my walls. If you ever find yourself in a small town at dusk and you hear a siren that isn't on any map, do yourself a favor. Go inside, close your curtains, and do not watch. Because once they know you're willing to stay and look, they stop waiting for the siren to call. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there. Story 3. I started receiving voicemails from my own phone number, dated 3 days in the future. First one showed up while I was making coffee. My phone didn't vibrate, it didn't ring. It was just a notification sitting quietly on the screen, like it had always been there. 1 missed call, voicemail received. The number was mine. The exact same area code, the same last 4 digits. Even the contact photo I'd set for myself months ago was staring back at me. I figured it was just a glitch. Phones do weird things sometimes, right? But then I checked the timestamp, and my stomach just tightened into a knot. The voicemail was dated 3 days from now. I hesitated for a lot longer than I probably should have. There's just something about a message from the future that feels fundamentally wrong in a way that logic can't really explain. But eventually curiosity won. I pressed play. Static filled my ear first, then breathing. It was uneven, shallow, panicked. Finally, a voice whispered, so quiet I almost missed it. "Don't answer the next one." It was my voice. It's not a recording, not distorted or anything. Just my voice, absolutely terrified. The voicemail cut off right in the middle of a breath. Ow. No explanation, no context, just pure, unfiltered fear. I checked the duration. 17 seconds. Short enough to feel intentional, but long enough to be a warning. I deleted it immediately. Of course, that didn't help. The memory was already there. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail, same number, same future date. This one was longer. I didn't want to listen. I really didn't, but I did anyway. "Okay," my voice said, a little calmer this time. "You're probably confused. That means this is still early." I had to sit down, and my legs felt weak. "You're going to want to ignore these," the voice continued, "but you won't." I didn't either. There was a pause. If you're hearing this, it means you already answered something. My heart was pounding in my chest. I don't remember answering anything, I whispered to the empty room. The voicemail continued as if it heard me. Neither did I. The message crackled with a burst of static. There's something that uses numbers, my future voice said, the calm completely gone. Calls, notifications, timers, anything people trust without thinking. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the recording. It doesn't mimic voices perfectly at first. That's why it practices. A cold feeling washed over me, starting at the back of my neck and spreading down my spine. Just then, my phone vibrated again. An incoming call. Unknown number. Call just rang and rang. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't answer. It finally stopped. No voicemail followed, not right away. A minute passed, then another, and then a new voicemail appeared. From me, same future date. You didn't answer, the voice said, and the relief in it was so obvious it was almost painful. Good. That buys time. Time for what? I wanted to scream. The voicemail kept going. Rule 1. Never answer calls you weren't expecting. I let out this nervous scoffing sound, little too late for that. Rule 2. If the caller knows your name before you speak, hang up. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Incoming call. This time my own name appeared on the screen. I just watched it, didn't touch it. The ringing stopped. The next message explained why. That thing can't cross over unless you acknowledge it, my future voice said. Answering isn't just listening, it's permission. I thought back to all the spam calls I'd casually answered over the years, all the unknown numbers I'd picked up, all the times I'd just said hello without a second thought. You answered once already, the voicemail added, the voice now soft and almost sad. That's why it knows your timing. The next message arrived right at midnight. This one was different. It wasn't future dated. Timestamp was for right now. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. I pressed play. Hi, a voice said, cheerful and bright. It wasn't my voice, but it was almost mine. Thanks for picking up earlier, but I hadn't. I was sure of it. Hadn't answered a single strange call all day. I immediately checked my call history, scrolling frantically. And there it was. An answered call. Duration. 6 seconds. The timestamp was from earlier that morning. I had absolutely no memory of it. But the log insisted I had taken the call that I'd spoken. That terrified me more than any voicemail from the future. The idea that my own phone, my own memory, could be lying to me. The next voicemail I got from myself sounded different, slower, older, exhausted. If you're still getting these, the voice said with a sigh, it means I failed. A long, heavy pause hung in the air. Tried to stop answering, but it gets harder. It calls when you're half asleep, when you're distracted, when you think it's someone else. The end of the sentence was just swallowed by a wave of static. Then my phone rang again. This time the caller ID wasn't a number. It was a name. My mother's name. She died 5 years ago. I just stared at the screen, completely frozen. I couldn't breathe. The phone stopped ringing, and a voicemail arrived instantly. It played automatically, without me touching it. I know you miss me, a voice said gently. It wasn't my mother's voice, but it was close enough to hurt. It's why you'll answer next time. I threw the phone across the room. It clattered against the wall and fell to the floor. It rang again anyway. The next voicemail from myself was barely a whisper. Desperate. Don't listen to them all, my voice begged. Each one you listen to makes it clearer. Clearer how? I thought. As if answering the question, the voice added to sound like you. I started noticing gaps in my day. Conversations I couldn't remember having. Text messages I'd apparently sent to friends. Calls in my log that I had no memory of answering. It felt like every voicemail I received from the future was replacing something from my present, like a trade, piece of information for a piece of my life. Its presence in my phone was erasing my presence in my own reality. Then the timestamps started changing. They stopped being 3 days ahead. Then they were 2 days ahead. Then 1. The messages were catching up to me. The future was closing in. You're running out of buffer, future me warned, the voice tight with panic. Once the dates match, it doesn't need me anymore. I didn't like what that implied, at all. The final voicemail from myself arrived at dawn. The timestamp was for right now. I knew I shouldn't listen. I did it anyway. "This is the last one," my voice said, sounding hollow. "After this, it's just you." A shaky breath. "When the phone rings, don't answer. Let it keep calling. Let it starve." The rest was just static. And then the phone rang. Again and again. Different numbers, different names. People I knew. People I know. People I loved. All familiar. All wrong. I finally managed to grab the phone and hold down the power button. Turning it off, it didn't matter. Out. The screen stayed dark, but the ringing continued. A phantom sound coming from a dead device. I understand now. Answering isn't just permission to speak. It's permission to be heard, to be mapped, to be practiced, and finally, to be replaced. The voicemails eventually stopped. The calls slowed down. But sometimes, late at night, my phone lights up on its own. It sits on my nightstand, dark and silent, and then the screen just wakes up. No sound, just a single notification. Voicemail received. From me. Dated tomorrow. I never listen. I can't, because I'm not sure whose voice I'd hear now. Mine, or the one that sounds almost like me. Thanks for listening. Story 5. Everyone who lives in my apartment building agreed to the curfew. I found out why too late. The first note wasn't threatening. That's what bothered me the most. No bold letters, no warnings, no dramatic exclamation points. Just a single sheet of white paper taped neatly to my apartment door when I got home from work. It said, "Curfew begins at 11 p.m. Please be inside your unit by then. Do not use the hallways until morning." There was no signature, no official management logo, no explanation. I just assumed it was some kind of notice from the building manager. That is, until I realized it was handwritten. I'd only moved in 2 weeks before. It's one of those older buildings, 6 floors with long, narrow hallways that always smell faintly of dust and old cleaning solution. It's the kind of place where neighbors actively avoid making eye contact in the elevator. So when I saw the note, I figured it was just about noise complaints. Or maybe there had been some vandalism. Or maybe, just maybe, someone in the building had a serious control issue. I crumpled up the piece of paper, unlocked my door, and went inside, not giving it a second thought. That night, I stayed up well past midnight, watching videos on my laptop. Nothing happened. No angry knocks, no follow-up notes. I went to bed thinking the whole thing was completely ridiculous. But the next night, something strange happened. At 10:55 p.m., the building was totally normal. I could hear doors opening and closing down the hall, the sound of footsteps on the floor above me, even the low murmur of a TV through my wall. Then, at exactly 11 p.m., it all stopped. I don't mean it got quieter over time. It stopped instantly, abruptly. No more footsteps, no sounds from the plumbing, no hum of the elevator. The silence was so sudden and complete, it felt intentional, like someone had just flipped a switch and turned the whole building off. The next morning, I saw the woman who lives across the hall. I decided to ask her about the curfew. The second I mentioned it, she froze. Her eyes darted nervously down the hallway, then back to me, wide with something I couldn't quite read. "You were inside, right?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. "Yes," I said. I saw her shoulders relax just a little bit. "Good," she replied, a strange sense of relief washing over her face. "Please, just don't test it." And that was all she said before she quickly slipped back inside her apartment and closed the door, leaving me standing there more confused than ever. That night, another note appeared. It was taped to my door in the exact same spot, same neat handwriting, same plain white paper. As one said, "Thank you for complying. Please continue to do sulfur monoxide." And that's when a cold sense of unease finally settled deep in my chest. You don't thank people for following imaginary rules. This was something else. Something was very wrong. I found out what happens if you're late just 3 days later. I had to work late. I missed my usual bus. And by the time I was jogging up the front steps of the building, my watch read 11:02 p.m. The lobby lights were on, but the building felt empty. It was too empty. There was no background hum from the lights, no air circulating, absolutely no sound at all. The elevator was waiting on the ground floor, its doors wide open as if it were expecting me. I stepped inside. The doors just stayed open. I pressed the button for my floor, then pressed it again. Nothing happened. The lights inside the elevator car flickered softly. Then, A single word appeared on the small digital display where the floor numbers usually were. It said WAIT. I took an involuntary step backward, away from the open doors. Then, as if they had a mind of their own, they slid shut, but the elevator didn't move. It just sat there. And from outside the elevator in the silent lobby, I heard a sound. A scraping sound moving along the floor. It was slow and deliberate. It sounded like long fingernails being dragged lightly across the tile. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound myself. The scraping stopped right outside the elevator doors. There was a long pause. And then, a knock. But it wasn't a knock on the elevator door. It was a knock on the inside of my head. "You're late," a voice said gently. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It just sounded disappointed. The elevator lights dimmed until I was standing in near darkness. "I didn't know," I whispered to the empty space around me. The voice seemed to hum thoughtfully, a sound that vibrated through the floor. "You were told," it said. Then the doors opened. The hallway on my floor was much darker than usual. The lights were flickering weakly, casting long, dancing shadows. The walls themselves seemed closer together, making the narrow hall feel even more claustrophobic. The voice spoke again, but this time, it was coming from everywhere at once, seeming to echo from the walls themselves. "The building needs quiet," it said. "At night, it listens." I stepped out of the elevator slowly, and the door slid shut behind me with a soft click. That's when I heard movement. It wasn't footsteps. It was a shifting, an adjusting sound. Like something huge was repositioning itself inside the walls around me. "You see," the voice continued, its tone calm and conversational. "This place was built around something." My heart was pounding against my ribs, something that doesn't sleep. The hallway lights flickered again, more violently this time. And for just a split second, in that strobe of failing light, I saw them. Tall, thin shapes pressed flat against the walls between the apartment doors. They were too thin, with too many joints in the wrong places. Their outlines were only visible where the weak light seemed to bend strangely around their forms. They weren't moving, they were just waiting. The voice spoke again, as calmly as if explaining the weather. "If you are inside your unit by curfew, you are safe." It paused, letting the words hang in the dead air. "If you were in the hallway," it continued, "you become part of the listening." I started backing away, slowly, desperately, toward the safety of my apartment door. As I moved, the shapes seemed to shift, their silent attention now focused entirely on me. Suddenly, a door down the hall creaked open. It was Mr. Alvarez from 5B. He stepped out, and his face went pale when he saw me. "Get inside," he whispered urgently, his eyes wide with terror. But it was too late. One of the long, thin shapes peeled itself away from the wall, moved without a sound. Mr. Alvarez screamed. It was a short, sharp sound that was cut off instantly. Then, complete silence. His door remained open to an empty apartment. The hallway somehow felt fuller now. I ran. My keys were shaking so badly in my hand, I could barely fit one into the lock. My hands were numb. My mind was blank with panic. I have no idea how, but I managed to get my door open just as the hallway lights went out completely, plunging everything into absolute darkness. I slammed the door shut, locked it, bolted it, and leaned against it, gasping for air. The total, profound silence returned. A few minutes later, at 11:07 p.m., a single sheet of paper slid silently under my door. It said, "Thank you for your patience. Balance has been restored." The next morning, Mr. Alvarez's apartment was empty. There were no police, no questions, no investigation. It was as if he had never existed. By noon, a maintenance crew was inside, repainting the entire unit. New tenant moved in the very next day. No one ever spoke Mr. Alvarez's name again. I don't leave my apartment at night anymore. Not for food, not for emergencies, not for anything. Because sometimes right at 11 p.m., I hear it. The movement in the hallway, the slow scraping, the soft sound of something breathing just outside. And then, I hear something tapping gently on my door. It's not a knock. It's just listening. Last night, a new message was waiting for me, taped to my door. The handwriting was more careful this time, more precise. It said, "We appreciate your cooperation. You are learning quickly. Soon, you won't need reminders." I have no idea what happens then. But I know one thing for sure. The curfew isn't meant to protect us from what's outside the building. It's meant to protect the building. It's from us. So if you ever move into a new place and find a note about a curfew, just follow it. Don't argue, don't ask questions. And whatever you do, don't be late. Now, because some buildings aren't just places where people live. They're places where something else stays awake. And it really, really hates to be disturbed. Thanks for listening. If you liked this story, be sure to subscribe for more. Story 4. Every person in my town freezes for 1 minute at 3:33 a.m. except me. The first time it happened, I thought I was dreaming. I woke up at 3:32 a.m. with that strange, heavy feeling you get right before a nightmare. The room felt way too quiet, like someone had hit a mute button on the entire world. I just lay there, staring at my ceiling. Then, my phone screen lit up. 3:33 a.m. And that's when everything stopped. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty. The low hum of my refrigerator vanished. The distant sound of traffic was gone. Even the faint ringing in my own ears just faded away. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Outside my window, the world was frozen solid. Car sat halfway through the intersection down the street. A street light was stuck mid-flicker. A man walking his dog on the sidewalk was frozen mid-step, one foot hovering just above the pavement. He wasn't paused. He was stopped. I knew it was real, because dreams don't hold still like that. Dreams always have wobbly edges, right? This was sharp, crystal clear. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. My body moved just fine, but nothing else did. Stepped outside onto my porch. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was walking through invisible jelly. The man in the street didn't blink, didn't breathe. He didn't even react when I waved my hand inches from his face. I checked my phone again. Still 3:33 a.m. The seconds just weren't moving. And then a sound broke the silence. Footsteps, but they weren't mine. They were slow, measured. Coming from the end of the street, I turned, and my blood ran cold. Someone else was moving. She walked calmly through the frozen street, her hands clasped behind her back. She wore a long, dark coat, and her hair was pulled back tightly. Her eyes were sharp, focused. She didn't look surprised at all to see me standing there. In fact, she smiled. First time? My voice came out all shaky. What is happening? She glanced at my phone in my hand, she said, her smile widening a little. You're early. She explained it so quickly like she'd given this speech 100 times before. People call it the still minute, she said. Happens every night at 3:33. Every night, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. She nodded.
For most people, it just passes by. You're asleep, or you're dreaming, or your mind just smooths over the gap so you never notice. My stomach twisted into a knot.
But you're awake, she said, right at me.
That's why you're here. That's when I noticed others.
A man was leaning against a lamppost, watching us. A teenage girl was sitting on the hood of a car, swinging her legs. A woman was standing in the middle of the street, just staring up at the sky. They were all moving, all watching. How many of us are there? I asked. The woman in the coat just shrugged. Enough, she tilted her head upward, toward the dark sky. At 3:33, the world pauses just long enough for adjustments. Adjustments to what? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she said, you should probably stay close to the group. Why? Because you don't want to be alone when they notice you. Just then, the air rippled. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. Like the pressure changing right before a big storm. Something passed through the intersection. It didn't have a shape, but it was heavy enough to bend the stillness around it as it moved. What was that? I asked, my voice trembling. The woman's smile was completely gone now. That's why the minute exists, she said. She told me that time didn't actually stop. It folded. It compressed. Like holding your breath for a very, very long time. The world keeps going, she said. Just not where you can see it. That didn't sit right with me. You mean something's happening right now, while everything's frozen? She nodded grimly. And sometimes she added, it needs witnesses. Of course, there were rules. There are always rules. Don't touch the frozen people. Don't shout, because sound carries differently here. If something looks back at you, whatever you do, don't run. I swallowed hard. What happens if you break the rules? She met my eyes, and her gaze was terrifyingly serious. You stay. As we walked, I started noticing something really unsettling. Some of the frozen faces weren't neutral. Their expressions had changed. I saw fear, confusion, even recognition. "Can they see us?" I asked her. "Not exactly," she replied. "But some of them can feel it." Suddenly, a sound echoed across the town. A deep, resonant shift, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. The woman beside me stiffened. "They're early tonight," she said.
I asked, but she just grabbed my arm. "Walk faster." They emerged gradually, not as solid things, but as distortions.
Places where the air seemed to bend inward, like something was pressing against reality from the other side. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could feel their attention on me. They were searching. The woman stopped near a frozen park bench. "You ever wonder why some people just die in their sleep?" she asked quietly. My throat got tight. "They notice," she said. "They wake up at the wrong moment." Then one of the distortions paused. It hovered, and it turned, directly toward me. My chest felt like it was being crushed. "I think they see me," I whispered. The woman cursed under her breath. "Of course they do," she said. "You're new." A voice filled the stillness. It wasn't spoken, but I understood it perfectly in my head. Asterisk, you can stay awake. Asterisk, my head throbbed with the pressure. Asterisk, you can move freely. Asterisk, what happens if I accept? I managed to ask. The woman just shook her head slowly. "You don't want that job." She explained that the people who could move, the ones like us, weren't chosen. We were left behind. Fragments of attention that just slipped through the cracks when time paused. Some stayed too long. Some forgot how to rejoin the flow of time. And some made deals. "They become guides," she said, "or watchers. Or worse." Just then, my phone vibrated in my hand. The screen flickered, and the time jumped. 3:34 a.m. The world shuddered back to life. Sound rushed in from every direction. Engines roared. People blinked and kept walking. The frozen man stumbled forward, completely unaware that he'd ever stopped. I looked beside me, but the woman was gone. I was standing alone in the middle of the street, but in my palm was a small folded piece of paper. Written in neat handwriting were just 6 words. Asterisk, you'll wake up again. Anatu. Asterisk. I tried to stay asleep the next night. Really did. But something in me was listening now. At 3:32 a.m., my eyes snapped open. The room felt heavy. My phone lit up. 3:33 a.m., everything stopped. Again, I'm telling you this because last night, there were more people moving in the stillness, because the distortions stayed for longer, because one of them spoke my name, because the woman in the coat didn't come back. So, if you ever wake up at 3:33, close your eyes, stay as still as you can, and just let the minute pass. Because once you learn how to move while the world is frozen, something else learns how to move toward you. Thanks for watching. If you want to hear what happens next, make sure to subscribe.